Okay, so welcome back. Today, I'm actually going to take a look at the upcoming Generation 4 X1 Extreme by Lenovo ThinkPad. And in all actuality, I've actually been waiting for Lenovo to kind of drop the product specification reference spreadsheet or PDF prior to me actually making this video so then I could compare the actual specs that are on the laptop. And in all actuality, if you actually go to the website, which I'll show you, they do not have it still, which is just beyond me. Um, Mainly because it's kind of been given to a couple of folks to actually review it, but they are just pre-production models. They're not the actual production models. So I'm hoping there isn't any issue. Maybe one of the issues I'm going to talk about today might be one of the reasons why it's being delayed. But if you actually go to Lenovo's website, and I'll jump over there, they do have a placeholder for this system right now. Let me close out of this. And it just says that it's coming soon. The other kind of good thing is they do have some of the tech specs, so that's what I'm actually going to use today to do this comparison. And primarily, I'm going to be comparing it with the Generation 3. If you're new here, first time watching one of these by me, really one of the main reasons why I like to compare newer versions of laptops, especially ThinkPads that I actually like, is sometimes from what I've seen, just because it's the newest version doesn't necessarily mean it's like the best bang for the buck, in my opinion, based on the type of stuff that I like to do, video editing, gaming, modeling, that type of stuff, photo editing as well. And there's been times like, for instance, when I ended up with my T430, I actually had bought the newer generation Lenovo, which was the T440 at the time, and I completely hated it. So I sent it back and I actually downgraded to the T430. So, when I'm looking at a replacement possibly for the X1 Extreme Generation 1 that I currently have, um, I'm always looking at, okay, is this going to be a good purchase or not? So, I'm going to jump over to the other camera really quick. All right. So, what I actually did is I created a spreadsheet, and I've done this with all the models of the Extreme uh, and just compared them spec for spec. I actually did a comparison also with the T15g, and then of course now this laptop is out. Uh, what I can say, looking at everything on paper, I'm just going to move up and down here. It appears to be a pretty good deal, but we'll go through this and talk about it. So here are my thoughts, and once again, here are some of the comparisons of those specs compared to the previous generation. So if you bear with me, I am going to jump down and open up the spreadsheet. Okay, so jumping over to the spreadsheet here, this is kind of what I've did, and I did the exact same thing when I compared Gen 1, 2, and 3 of the X1 Extreme ThinkPad. So starting over with what I currently have based on what's on the website, what I ended up doing is I highlighted the parts, or I should say I highlighted those things that changed in red, and then of course both of them so they kind of stand out here on the spreadsheet versus the previous generation. And I don't have 2 and 1 on this spreadsheet, but I do have those videos up so you could always watch them. But the first things first, they went with the 11th generation Intel processor. So yeah, latest and greatest, that actually makes sense, especially considering the class of notebook that you're buying here or laptop that you're buying here is business class, professional, pricey. So you kind of expect the top end processor that's available. So yeah, it didn't necessarily list all of the different processors, and there are going to be various ones. But it's going to be very close to what you saw with the Gen 3. So there'll be a lot of different options. Um, and there should be an i5, an i7, and an i9, but we shall see. The operating system didn't change. They don't have Windows 11 listed on here yet, but I see that that's coming eventually. Windows 11 will be on this laptop, considering when this is going to be released and when Windows 11 is actually going to be pushed out. Uh, Moving on to the display. The display is where this thing gets interesting because they decided to go with the 16-inch screen. So it's a 16 by 10 format, so it gives you more real estate. I kind of like that idea, but I don't know if I necessarily need it because I get along just fine with the 15.6. And then I also have an external monitor that you can probably see in one of these videos that I actually use to help out. But if you jump into those 16-inch displays, you'll notice that they now offer a 16 ultra high definition IPS touchscreen, and it has 600 nits, which is pretty impressive. In addition to that, it has the 100% Adobe and then RGB calibration. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna see if I can expand this so you can read the rest of it. So there you go. So yeah, and it's also 2-bit color, not 10-bit. Then moving on to the next option, you get the same sort of screen, but you don't get the touch screen if you don't want that. In my case, if I pick this up, I don't really do touch screens because I don't really like them, so I probably wouldn't get that one. Uh, and then next one down the line here is going to be your it's going to be a high definition screen as well, but it's not going to be the 4K monitor that you're going to be used to. And it's actually more of like a 2K monitor, 16 inch. Once again, they're all going to be the same sort of size, 400 nits. So it's not going to be as bright for, doing work, whether you're outside or not. I actually like the 600 nits, but I kind of wish the 600 nit screen was on the, lower resolution screen. So me personally, I don't need 4K on a screen this size. I don't think I'll need it on a 16-inch screen. Maybe I'm wrong. But once again, I have a screen for that type of stuff. So I would just rather have a screen that's going to use less battery life, but it's a little bit brighter when I'm outside. That's my personal opinion. And then it's also going to support your 4 independent displays. So once again, if you want to push something to external monitors, you can do 3 if you include the laptop. Uh, Moving right along, okay, this is the big news for me anyways, is the graphics cards. And the graphics on this system, to be honest with you, it's pretty killer. Uh, I mean, really, if you look at the fact that they're putting the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3080 inside of this thing, and you consider the size which we haven't gotten to, that's pretty impressive. I mean, that's a powerful graphics card, and for it to be in something that's this light, that is something. But I'm wondering if that's going to create some other issues. Now, I did research and look and find in other places that graphics card is going to actually come with 16 gigs also of DDR4 RAM. So that's pretty impressive, to say the least. They do have a lot of other options here, and really this is what kind of sells this laptop for me, because for the previous generation laptops that had the 1650, me personally, it wasn't enough of an upgrade to consider leaving the Gen 1. But these cards are significantly, better. And I would say really I'm referring to the 3080. So that's pretty impressive. And then once again, you're going to get various choices, unlike before where you really got what came in it and that was really it. Actually, I think one of the laptops, one of the generations, you could get a choice of 2. It was a 1050 and a 1650, but don't quote me on that. Then moving on to the camera. The camera is finally 1080p. To me, laptop cameras have been so horrible. I honestly don't even use them for streaming. I have a bunch of other cameras, and frankly, I use my phone too. But it's good to see that they've actually kind of made that better. I don't really know why it took this long. Otherwise, it still has the privacy shutter, which I love. And then it also still has the IR. So the next thing is the memory. The memory did have a slight change, and it really just bumped up the speed of the memory. So now it can support up to 3200 megahertz dual channel versus the 2933 it used to support, which is actually over here. Nothing really changed with the storage. Okay, so the battery. Here's the deal, and this is probably one of the biggest downsides for me. The battery life, and and I'll get into this when we start talking about some of my concerns with this laptop. But the battery life went down, and it only makes sense because you're going to have a much more powerful processor now with the 11 Gen. And then you're also, I think they're Lake processors, and then you're also going to have uh, a more powerful GPU. So once again, the power's got to be pulled from somewhere, and I think that battery is the exact same size from what I can tell. So since they did not, enlarge it, but you have more, power that's being drawn, once again, your battery life's going to probably take a hit. So, and like I said, there's going to have to be some give and take here just because you're getting a device that's a lot more powerful. If we jump down to the audio. So now the audio, they redesigned the laptop, and I'll jump over to some pics here just to kind of show you what I'm talking about. What they actually did is they have up-firing laptops versus the ones that were on the previous generations. So I'm curious to see what this sounds like. Now, once again, I use powered speakers for most of my work, especially when I'm talking about studio stuff and gaming stuff. So I'm not really listening to uh, the laptop speakers that often. So yeah, I don't really know if it's going to be that big of a difference, but it's nice to see a change and to see some of an upgrade. Jumping back over to the spreadsheet here, there's dual far field mics as well. That's another thing that I really don't use a lot of. If anything, the mics on my laptops, I use them to sync the video when I'm doing a screen recording, like for this video, but that's it. Otherwise, it's all external. If I'm not using, lavalier stuff, wireless mics, I have shotgun mics as well. Okay, so now we're going to get into the security. The security did not change at all from what I can tell. So we'll shoot past that one to the ports. And now your ports, you're going to get HDMI 2.1 versus the 2.0 that was on the previous laptop. So a little bit better. And then we jump into connectivity. So Bluetooth gets an upgrade, jumps up to 5.2, as well as your WAN. So your WAN, the integrated global broadband, is now going to be capable of really 5G, and they have sub 6G or gigahertz. So once again, I don't necessarily use that, but because it is an upgrade, I really wanted to kind of mention it. And then we're going to jump to the dimensions. So the dimensions had to change. Once again, you changed the format of that screen. The size now is 16 by 10. So therefore, there are going to be a couple of things that are going to be different here, but a couple of these kind of threw me for a loop only because when I compared them to the previous generation, I was expecting them to change too, and they didn't, or they went the wrong way. And I'll tell you what I'm talking about. So like, for instance, you start talking about the height of the laptop. So we're actually referring to the thickness is what some people call it. That is now 17 millimeters, 17.7, and it actually went down from the 18.4. And once again, me personally, I thought that one was actually going to increase a little, but then the size, actually, the weight went up a little, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. But I just figured there's going to be more stuff kind of packed in there. And then when we start talking about like the vapor bay for cooling, that type of stuff, which I'll talk about later, I just figured it was going to add to the thickness of it. But when I look inside of it, I can see where it didn't necessarily have to. Because the bay is actually taking up surface area. It's not necessarily taking up height. And then also, let's see, something else changed there that was confusing to me. The width. Okay, the width now is 359 millimeters, 0.5 or 14.3. So the width actually shrank. That was one that I actually thought was going to expand, but it did not. However, the depth did increase. So the depth now is going to be 9.99 inches or 253.8 millimeters. It was 9.67 inches or 245.7. So that one makes sense. Once again, larger screen, but I actually expected it to do this too. And it's mainly because of that vapor bay. I'm thinking you're putting more stuff in there. Things have to go out. But then once we get to when I get to some of my concerns with this, we'll talk more about the vapor bay. The weight only went up a little bit. And what they haven't cited is what the weight's going to be for the individual screens. So in my mind, when I see this weight, I don't know if they're talking about the touch screen or they're not talking about the touch screen. If they are not talking about the touch screen, then this actually makes sense because it seems like this laptop should weigh more. So 3.9 for the non-touchscreen version would be, to me, where it should be. And then your touchscreen version would be just slightly more. So it would be approximately a quarter of a pound, because that's really what it was for the last generation. So you can take a look at that there. So that's what I'm thinking, maybe 4.25 for your touchscreen version. But we shall see. And then finally, the keyboard. Keyboard turn is just a tad. You have call control keys or F9, F11. But they redesigned the touchpad because you have more real estate. They actually have a slightly larger touchpad now, which is pretty neat. I'm just glad that they did not touch the track point or any of the dedicated keys. Although I think they're probably going to be a little wider, but I don't think that causes a problem. Not like T440 issues where you have to send the laptop back, which is what I did. Okay, so now that I talked about a lot of these, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to jump into some of my issues with this laptop so far. And this is just based on, looking at the specs, what I think, looking at other laptops with the same sort of stuff, and, just kind of discuss those things. So the first thing for me really was the heat. Because when I first saw that they were going to put a GTX RTX, or excuse me, a NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3080 into a laptop that weighs 3.99 pounds, I'm thinking, okay, how do you dissipate all the heat? Now, granted, I have read, and I will show you some other pictures of what their design looks like on the inside. So it actually helps it make a little more sense. Actually, I'm gonna have to jump over to my library here. Okay, so what they actually did is, versus if you're familiar with the inside of the previous generation uh, X1 Extremes, this will look a little bit different to you. But what they actually did here is they put a vapor bay, and then they also have cooling pipes. And if you're not familiar with that terminology, what the vapor bay does is actually your processor will be underneath here, and it allows the air, the hot air, to dissipate in more than a one-dimensional direction. Because if you think about it, your heating pipes, cooling pipes, whatever you want to call them, they're pushing the air, and they suck in the cool air and they push out the hot air, but they do it one way. So the air travels in one direction. Generally, you have two cooling pipes. Well, what the vapor bay does, it actually allows the cooling to occur around the entire processor. So it's over the processor, and the dissipation of the heat goes everywhere. They actually have both of these inside of this laptop, which to me is pretty impressive. And like I said, even though it is a concern for me, it's a little less of a concern only because they did something like this similarly with, and I'll pull it up right now, the Legion 7 15-inch, and that thing has excellent cooling. It's a gaming laptop. It actually doesn't have this this GPU in it. Generates a lot of heat. Now keep in mind, the Legion is a slightly larger. It's like a 4.9, I believe, pound laptop. And yeah, it does really well when it comes down to cooling. So because they figured it out over there, I have faith that they figured it out here and it won't be an issue. Let's see. Let me go back over to my notes really quick. Uh, the other problem that I have, and I'm going to actually switch to another picture here just so I can kind of show you. Actually, I'll go back to my previous picture. Is the battery. The battery doesn't look any different. And I would say if I'm going to ding anything on the extreme, it's going to be the battery life. I literally just replaced the battery in mine. I've owned it since like 2018. Thinking the battery was like dying because previous Lenovo's, that usually was the case. Uh, and it wasn't. The battery life have just gotten to the point where it's degraded. But even though I've actually refreshed back to factory and did a bunch of different things, can't seem to get it back to where it was when I first bought it. And that's not saying it was that great to begin with. It never really got close to what the factory quoted numbers were. And I know now, looking at their specs, that this one is probably going to get even less. So yeah, there is some room for concern for me. I literally hope that it is something that, at the very least, with that much power, if I get 7 or 8 hours, basically still get a decent amount of work done, I would be okay with having a little less, considering how much more power I'm going to get from this particular configuration. Let's see. Jumping back over here, me personally, I probably would have been a little happier if maybe the weight increased by another quarter pound. So let's just say It went to 425 or 4.25 without the touchscreen, or 4.5 with the touchscreen, but I get a bigger battery. I personally think that would be worth it. And that's just coming from a current, or I should say a Gen 1 owner. Because this laptop is really light, especially considering the real estate. So frankly, I would happily give that up to get just a little more battery life. And on top of that, in my mind, I'm thinking that if you increase the size of the chassis and you can get some more maybe ports in there for cooling, that might help with your heat dissipation. But once again, that might not even be an issue because I haven't seen the production models. Um, they may have already figured that part out. So let's see. What do I like about this? Um, Pretty much everything. I mean, I can tell you that I personally was considering the ThinkPad, and I'll pull it up over here, uh, T15 Golf, which I just reviewed, as my next laptop. And the funny thing about the T15 Golf is it doesn't even, you can't even spec the graphics card that they're actually going to put in this more portable ThinkPad. So it's almost like, why would I buy the T15 Golf? I mean, other than cost savings, right? Because the cost savings, I believe the T15 Golf is going to be less, which makes sense than the Extreme. But even still, me personally, I'm willing to pay a little more for that performance. I think the T15 Golf is a great or a great system, but I would basically have to wait and compare that system to this system when it comes out. But if everything checks out, I believe for myself, for the things that I use it for, I would probably stick with the X1 Extreme and get the Gen 4. In addition to that, there are things that the T4 or the T15 Golf offers that I don't even need, like the Xeon processor. So once again, that's not really a reason why to get the T15 Golf. Plus, you're going to get a lighter weight system with the X1 Extreme. So it's just neat that they created a product that actually is like this powerful and this light. So yeah, it's definitely on the list for my next laptop. I was actually even considering because of the editing, and I noticed that some of the newer software is actually kind of taxing on the 1050. I even thought about maybe just getting out of buying extremes and just going with something larger. So when the T15 came out, I was like, wow, that's probably the next one for me. And then it's not going to struggle as much with some things, to include gaming, by the way. But yeah, now I'm back on the extreme, so who knows? Uh, would I buy this over the third generation? Okay, so me personally, once again, knowing what I use this laptop for, uh, yes, I would buy this over the third gen in a heartbeat. And here's my rationale. The main reason is the GPU. Um, like I said, I'm glad that they went to the newer 11 gen Intel processors, and I've been reading pretty good things about those. But really, that GPU, because of the things that I do like to do, and I don't want to have a second system to do it. But actually, I have more than enough computers now. I don't want to have another computer just to be able to play games and those types of things. And by the way, the games that I'm playing, they're not like GPU intensive. Like they don't require, well, they do require a significant amount of power, but they're not like the worst of the worst. So, but I'm really into things like Genshin Impact, and I play Tony Hawk, that type of stuff. And I can still get drop frame rates when I actually send these to the 2K monitor. I can't necessarily max out the settings with the 1050. So I'm not saying that I really want to max out the settings with the next laptop, but to be able to play it and have a little bit better experience would definitely be worth just paying, more and then getting that type of laptop because then it's going to be able to do pretty much everything. So I think it's a great laptop. Like I said, I'm just waiting for them to release it just to see what it can actually do. And then I'm just going to go from there. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below. Click like, subscribe, and that's it. Agent Fit signing out.